Here's our conversation with David Van Oordsel. David is an ex-professional cyclist and has a content marketing agency in Italy that specializes in cycling.
So David, thanks for coming on today. To get started, I don't know, maybe just tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into cycling, and then maybe a little bit about what you do now in the content space.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's really cool. I love what you're doing, and yeah, I've been in cycling, I guess, just a little bit longer than I've been in Europe. So I'm originally from Minnesota, from the United States. Was racing bikes there. I moved out to California, got some decent results, and was able to land a spot on an Italian squad here, Italian amateur squad, and raced a few years there. Moved on to the professional ranks and the mountain bike side of things. And once I finished my career, I continued racing, working with athletes, which I still do today in terms of helping them do their stuff, but also working for the last, I guess it's 10 years now. I'd like to think that hasn't been so long, but I've been in Italy now for 12, working with in content marketing and branding content for cycling brands primarily.
So so you rode amateur road cycling in Italy. That's what brought you to Europe?
Yep, exactly. So yeah, it's compared to the US, even an amateur level in Italy. I mean, let's say there's a little bit of help along the way. A lot more here. It's just there's so much structure. I mean, it's like if you're going to play soccer, you're going to want to be in the US or in Europe. If you're going to play basketball, you're going to want to be in the US. So it was
So
kind of.
maybe people don't know this, but an American from Minnesota to go to Italy, I'm also from the Midwest. It's not a typical thing. So why?
It's a good question. I think I discovered cycling like a lot of other Americans did in the whole Armstrong boom. And, it was kind of a thing where finally, I mean, because I came after the Le Mans years, and then with the Armstrong years, it was just a massive boom. And when I get into something, I tend to really like to dig deep into it. And that's the same also in the content space that maybe we'll touch a bit. But I mean, when you're seeing the Tour de France as a 17-year-old on TV, it's like, oh, that's cool. And everybody thinks that cycling is just the Tour de France. And then I learned that there's all these other races. And I started really, really getting into it. And I've just kept on digging for more and more and more knowledge. And what I found more and more was, even if at the messaging at the time was, oh yeah, these Americans, they're going to take over the world, they're going to do this, that there's such a great tradition over here in Europe that it was something that I always wanted to be part of. And I mean, this is where the sport was born, and it's where the sport continues to be driven, both on the sport side of things, but also largely in the industry side of things.
Right. Absolutely. That's what we're here to talk about. So you
Yeah.
just said you just wanted to go deep, and this was the path.
Yep. So I raced then professionally on the mountain bike side of things for Focus bikes, and that was a really good experience. But like I think probably a lot of people from the outside, they see the in the States, I always get the question like, can you make money racing bikes? And well, I guess it's possible, yes. Are you going to be rich? Very unlikely. So it very much is a passion. And so I worked out a way that I started working with my sponsor kind of towards the end of my career, and then just after it. And that just opened up a lot of doors to starting to work with content for brands, because what I saw when I rocked in to the offices is I would, one of my good friends and colleagues was working in content or in marketing, and I was saying, okay, so what kind of content do you guys use? Like, what is it? What are you doing? And he was like, and he showed me. I said, that's it. I mean, it was relatively I was thinking of something like Nike or Adidas,
Right. Well, give us
and
some context. What year are we talking about?
we're talking 2014 ish,
So
2013, 2014.
so
So
Instagram is just kind of
just coming into its own. And at that point, fortunately, my boss at Focus Italia, he was actually, from an Italian perspective, was always much further ahead in terms of his thinking of saying, like, look, these social media platforms are media platforms, and we should be using those as a way to communicate with our customer base.
So
And
you were able to find kind of a sounding, you were able to find a common way of thinking with your sponsor at Focus, and then so you began helping them on the content side. So what did that look like?
it was a little bit less on the content side and a little bit more on the translation side, because I was really the intermediary between. I did pretty much. My hands were in a little bit of everything. I even did a lot of customer service stuff, which was not that much fun, but would work in terms of, they would have content come in and say, look, we're going to run this ad, and then the Italians would be able to use their, okay, you're going to put it in Bici Sport and put it into whatever mediums you want to, but then you're going to translate it and do all those things. And I was actually saying, like, look, what you've written here, that's not it. Or they would have a content package come down from headquarters, and it would just be like techno music,
Sure.
blasting, maybe a drone shot, because that was a thing that was at the very beginning of people like being able to use drones commercially. And I just kind of look at it and say, okay, yeah, that's cool, but like, what story are you guys trying to tell here? Like, what you're trying to communicate with the Italian market, but what is it about the Italian market? Oh yeah, I guess you're right. That's true. We don't have much. And so what that led me to do is I started working with my wife, actually, who has an audiovisual background as well. She's got a master's in it. And I said, like, she looked at me and said the same thing that I said to my colleague, is like, brands don't have the tools that they need to be able to market effectively. So even though there were those people, like where I was working, that they wanted to do things right, there wasn't the ability or the money there to be able to invest in a full production team to have in-house. And that's when I started working around 2014, 2015, to say, look, I'll create this content for you and deliver the content packages, and that way you can use it. And basically what I always say to people is that in the grand scheme of marketing, content is one of the tools that you have, or one weapon in your arsenal that you have to use. And that's my job, is to make sure that there's content there that speaks in a way that is telling the story that your brand wants to hear, or wants to get out there, the message that they want to get out there. And in a way that is very flexible and useful in a lot of different things. Because nowadays it's not, like you said, like when I started, Instagram was like kind of more personal, and now it's very much a tool for business. TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, classic PR, all of those are different platforms for which you need a significant amount of content. And
Absolutely.
they all need to be slightly different, and you need to deal with that and produce those pieces of content in different ways.
Well, what I saw, what I saw at that time when I started also working with brands, with cycling brands, was that they didn't need to make that much content really up until about 2013. And so what happened was the brands that had a kind of a more, kind of a longer view on things were able to capture a bunch of the market quickly. Like Rapha comes to mind. They had a really strong content sensibility. And so they were able to just basically, wipe the floor with everybody at that time, because no one knew what was going on. And so anyone that had good content had a competitive advantage. But this is 2014. Okay. And I think we all agree that everyone is sort of caught up now. And so take us to today. What's happening today? I have an idea, but I'd like to hear what you think.
So I guess to kind of bridge that Rapha, I'm glad you brought up Rapha, because the number of times in between 2015 and 2018 that a client would say to me, I want it to be like Rapha. I want it to be like Rapha. Okay, cool. Well, that's fantastic, because Rapha does, like you said, they were doing a fantastic job, and they continue to do a really good job with their content. However, that's Rapha's brand story. That's Rapha's brand.
Yeah, they've done that already. So you can't.
They've done that, and they've actually.
and I
It
think
moved on.
you're answering my question in a really succinct way, is you're saying
Mhm.
in a certain way, everybody's trying to be like Rafa. And I think in a certain way, a lot of people still are trying to be like Rafa. And that is a huge mistake right now.
Definitely. And where I think people looking from the outside, content looks like it looks simple. It's on the face of it, people say like, "Oh, I can do that with my phone." Yeah, that's true, but it's kind of like a bike. It's people say like, "Oh, that phone can create that content." Yes, but you need to be very clever, very meticulous, and very deliberate about what you're doing. It's just like a bike. That bike can win the Tour de France. Yes, that's true. Can you win the Tour de France?
Right. It's like Jimi Hendrix. It's like he can take a child's guitar and make it sound great. It's like,
Exactly. Yeah. Give him a ukulele and I'll pay the fee to get in, whatever island he's living on with Elvis and whatever.
so we're saying that there's a lot of Me Too happening, and some people, Me Too is the wrong word, but there's a lot of, me as well, that's happening in terms of content. And my opinion on that is yeah, you do have to punch through the noise, because at the end of the day, there's so much noise out there right now. So
Tons of
much
it.
noise out there. Every single brand is pushing stuff out. And people are spending a lot of time on their phone. But in order to, to stand out, you do have to take whatever, brand X, Y, and Z do well and tell that story in a unique way. And
And I think
I don't think that people get it, because I think that
no,
there is, the brands when they're making content, they have a lot of priorities, and to go this extra mile, it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of money. And some brands just maybe don't have the investment to do that. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying that it may seem like you're doing a good job, but a lot of times you're just kind of getting, you're just kind of checking the boxes. At least that's what
I
I'm saying.
think yeah, and I think like to answer or to I guess build on what you've just said is like the I guess sometimes it's easier. It can be easier to fall into the trap of I guess criticizing, and it's not to criticize what people are doing, but what I see missing today is that people have caught up to Rapha. Rapha is well past the 2013 Rapha. They're a completely different company, different ownership, the whole bit. But before it was kind of that was cool because, like you said, in 2013, 2014, just showing a dude looking like he's suffering on his bike in a beautiful place that somebody really wants to ride in, that was pretty novel at the time.
Totally was.
No, and I think, but now it's definitely not. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see brands making, and they make it over and over and over again across whether it's clothing, bikes, accessories, it doesn't matter. They're all making the mistake is that they think in terms of they're thinking like a tourism board. And a
What do
lot
you
of what
mean?
they're doing is saying,
What?
where can you ride? Oh, that's beautiful there. Okay, cool. But what does that have to do with you? Okay, cool. I'm glad that
Okay.
you
No,
went
I
to
see what you're
the place.
saying.
I'm
It,
cool. It's awesome that you can see that.
but the destination, but I'm going to push back there. The destination is a draw.
It's a draw. However, when everybody's going to the same place and everybody's doing the
Sure.
same thing,
Yep. It all looks the
wins
same and you're not standing out. Absolutely. So it's
what
like,
I
it might
see.
be right. It might be the right way to tell the story, suffering and the coffee and the journey and the destination with your friends. It might be the right one, but unfortunately, everybody's doing it
There's got to be something more. So it's
to stand
great.
out. Let's be
Yeah.
clear here.
So
To stand
I
out,
would say like
if brands want to stand out, they have to, because what's happening here is there's so much out there, so much content, so many brands, and we can talk about how clothing brands, hundreds of new clothing brands have been kind of born out of nothing just by having an Instagram account and a Shopify account. And at that point, they just need to buy some custom made clothing from, from one of the producers, and you've got a brand. And unfortunately, that sort of
Right.
diluted the market in a certain sense. And that's also part of what's happening now, is that there are so many clothing. I think I'm going to put it on clothing brands, because they really muddied the water with so many new brands out there that maybe the market just didn't need.
Yeah. Well, and I think, some of that is, that's with the clothing brands, is the barriers to entry are
We're so
relatively
low,
low compared to,
so low,
yeah.
so low.
And so, I mean, to touch back on like going to a place, that's, that's your set, and that's a definite element of what do you need? What do you need? Okay, you need a great set, you need a great place to tell your story. But if Steven Spielberg stops at saying, I found the perfect place to film my movie, he's got no movie. He's got a place to make pretty images.
Okay, so
The brands need to do today, and
storytelling.
the brands that are doing the best job today are centering their content around people-based stories. And
Okay.
that's not cheap, because
No.
that means often you need to have sponsored riders, ambassadors, and I'm not talking the typical like, I've got 50 million followers, 90% of which are bots, and look at me. I mean, there needs to be an actual story. Why is this person interested in, and what is this person's story, and who does that talk to? And that takes more thought than, and then at the end you can go to the Dolomites and film great stuff with that person. However, if there is no story behind it, people-based stories, you don't really have a compelling piece of content in 2023.
Right. I just turned your video off. I see it's kind of getting choppy. Where are you? Where does this podcast find you?
Unfortunately, in my house, but I think sometimes my wife has also got a video going in the other room, and sometimes Italian internet doesn't always
cooperate.
But yeah, cooperate. There you go.
Okay. So we're saying this is so interesting, because it's like, we're basically, what happened was the brands sort of, they rushed to we'll call it the content heavy, new world that happened in 2017, 18, and 19. And so now they're all here, but they're all kind of doing very similar things. So I guess, and we're saying that to be able to kind of break through, storytelling is one lever. I think video is another one. I know video is expensive and complicated, and you have to have the talent. You have to have someone that can be in the video, because it generally has to be person centric. But I'm 100% sure that, from the data, working with brands, that the video is another way to punch through the noise. But unfortunately, because of budgets, and because not everyone has someone that looks good on video just sitting around, that can jump in front of the camera and tell a story, video's not always an option. Is that what you're seeing as well?
I'm seeing, yeah, that. And then the other thing I think is, like, when you're talking about costs and all this, part of it too is the organization of how people are creating this content. Because what I've done with brands that works extremely effectively is to make sure that you're taking a production, and when you're making this production, you're putting it together, and you want to have the ability to use content across a lot of different platforms. So that means, instead of saying we're going to make a video, okay, cool, fantastic. But when you're there, you've got the opportunity to take product-based photo. You've got the ability to do interviews with some of the models, the riders, the sponsored riders, whatever they might be. And you can mix and match and create a lot of content in one go, if you're willing to put the work in and organize it.
Right. And that's that's also a learning curve, where to have someone that's like a content professional, like, you need someone that's a content professional to do that. Because I've been in situations where I've seen marketing managers that have 3,000 different things to do, and they try to pull this off. And it's just, they got to book the hotels, and they got to find and they got to make sure the riders' clothing fits them right, and and the bike's broken, and so they can't, like, to be able to then do a brief to where then you're coordinating, because that's real production though, David. Like, that's a real production, and I don't think an internal team can pull that off.
not the way that the majority of cycling brands are structured. No, but that's where somebody like I've seen your work, and I think it's fantastic, and the amount of variability in the content that a brand can get out of a single production, because you told me how it went. And when you're able to do that, like, it's so versatile, the
It
content.
is,
Like,
yeah,
it's
but you
so
have to,
versatile, and you can use it in so many ways.
but there's investment that has to go into it, and there is a lot of thought, and you have to have buy-in from the client. Like I was very lucky
Yeah.
the last project that I did, I had a very enthusiastic team on the other side, and man, that is amazing. So it's not as simple as, I don't want to make it sound simpler than it is. It's not as expensive, I think, as people think when you have the right people involved. So anyway,
And
but
that's,
I
yeah, I
think we're
think,
getting,
go ahead.
yeah, I think we're getting to the idea that, so what's happening is because of a lack of resources and because of what on the surface seems like, good enough, the content out there for, we'll say, mid-tier brands has been pretty homogenized. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it's a fair statement, because, yeah, I mean, there's that, like you say, there's that trust issue. And if somebody is just, a lot of times they'll bring in, a marketing manager and expect him or her to do everything from A to Z. And that's not fair. And I think it's also from whoever is deciding on the hiring side of it. Is like, marketing is very, very, very diverse. And what I do is, yes, it makes a part of marketing, but it is not marketing, not all of it.
Well, the marketing teams have changed so much in the last 10 years, in a sense that I think I did a presentation last year at Eurobike where about content planning, about media planning. And we were looking at what a media plan looked like in 2012 versus what a media plan looks like now. And it was insane, because in 2012 you had a PR publication, you had some Facebook posts, and maybe a newsletter. And now you have
Yeah. Yeah.
now you have Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, if you're ahead of the curve, LinkedIn, newsletter, webpage, blog, and this is like generally the same budget. I can't imagine the budgets like, went 5x on the marketing teams. I imagine the budgets are pretty similar.
Yeah.
So I think that's where, and the thing about cycling brands, especially Italian cycling brands, is they're global, but they're not big companies. They're really not. And so they
No.
don't have all this margin and profit to just be, dumping money into campaigns.
And it's funny, like, I've talked to people who work in content marketing on the sports side in Adidas or Nike. And when they ask, what sort of budgets are you dealing with? And I tell them, and they laugh. I mean, they're like,
Yeah.
that's what?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a niche, and I think we're in it because we do enjoy it. But I think I prefer being with company, with entrepreneurs and owners and families. I prefer that because you're able to see a lot more. If we're gonna go down this path here, it's like, I love working with these brands because you're working with different brands every single day. Where if
Right.
you're in something that's like, if you're working with brands like Nike or Adidas, you're going to spend your whole day discussing, one channel for one campaign for 3 months.
Right.
So
Well, and the other side to that is, like, yes, they do have massive budgets, and compared to that of cycling. But on the other hand, there's also massive amounts of waste in those content, in those productions. And that's where I think, when cycling brands, or whatever, it might not even be cycling, but a company that's the size of a typical cycling brand,
and we'll give
understands the
give
value.
let's give people context. So we're talking about, in cycling, we're looking at between 3 and 20 million in turnover, euros.
Mhm.
That's
Right.
about, you're covering probably 90% of the brands in northern Italy, France, Germany.
Yeah. Yeah, for the most part, yeah, the standard ones. And then they're going, and so, I mean, there are brands that I've talked to, and maybe they were lowballing it in terms of, like, foreseeing a potential negotiation in the future. But I mean, a big Spanish brand having 80,000 for the year. This was 2015, 80,000 euros for the year to spend on all their marketing activities.
Wow. Yeah,
You know,
that's strange. That's strange.
and I mean, but even say it was 10 times that. Say he was lying because he wanted to
He was
get
negotiating.
it negotiating, right? But say it's 10 times that. That's not a ton of money when you're looking at covering mountain bike,
Yeah.
city bike, electric bike,
Yeah.
road bike. I
Global.
mean,
It's global.
globally. And
I
yeah, and it's a global brand and that, and so yeah, I mean, those are, even if it's 10 times that, you have to, when you're working as a content agency, you have to understand how to work extremely efficiently
right.
for the maximum amount of deliverables in a
I was
way that
I was
doesn't. Go
sorry.
ahead.
I was talking to it becomes to my, I was talking to a really, a local brand that, does a couple million, but they have clients in Europe, US, and obviously Italy. So they have reach all across the world and in Australia. And it's like, we want to do brand building. Well, it's like, oh my God, I mean, if we're going to do brand building, like it's really stretched thin in terms of how you want to invest that whatever budget that you have. And so you really have to make some hard decisions. And so this is where I think, again, probably being really, really efficient and focused about what you're creating is going to be the best kind of ROI on the marketing budget that these smaller brands have. I think that's what we're saying, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, and like you said, I think you touched on it earlier, but it's like when, an outside agency is, giving, this is our budget to be able to produce the following, and that you'll be able to use across all these channels for the next 6 months, 8 months, whatever it is. When you see the sticker price, at first it's like, whoa. But then when you really break it down, you go like, well, what would the cost of hiring all those things internal? I mean, it's like a tenth of the cost.
Sure.
And you're getting people that are doing that job over and over and over again. I mean, it's all year long. That's what we do.
Right.
Constantly thinking, oh, this could be a cool story to tell. What if you took a rider and was able to do this in this place? It could work really well with the following brands. Okay, note taken. Let's put it away for when you find the right person.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation. I think as we're talking, it's like this could break off into about 20 different directions, whether it be like, how to manage a campaign, or where we think the channels are going to go, which channels are going to be the most effective over the next few years. But I think we got to definitely have maybe a part two of this where we can dive a little deeper into some other concepts as well.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
but it was really cool talking, David, and hearing, being able to kind of dive into this. I hope, this is the first podcast that I'm recording for the business of cycling. And I think we really pulled off some insights, and definitely people in the industry, which this is going to be for industry folks, shops, bike shops, just to kind of have an inside look at what's happening in the in the industry, because I think there really isn't anything out there right now. I think so. That's kind of my goal here.
Well, it's cross. I didn't realize I was the first one. Now I'm super honored. Right before I was just a regular honored. Now I'm super honored.
Okay. Well, we're like two. It was so funny because when we met, it was like I think I came across your profile on LinkedIn, and I was like, this guy's American and he works in Italy and he works in cycling, and like we're kind of close in age. And I was like, oh my God, like this is so strange, because it's the exact same path that I'm on. So I reached out to you on LinkedIn. I'm like, we have to talk because
And then the fact that you're a Midwesterner too, which is awesome.
we're
Although actually, Minnesota, we're trying to rebrand as the North, I've heard. So I don't know how that's catching on, but apparently we're the
okay.
North now, not Midwest anymore. But that's all right. I was born in the Midwest. I'm the Midwest. So yeah, and the
Okay.
fact that it's like two Midwesterners in Italy. I mean, but we're like a 3-hour drive from each other. No problem, man.
Crazy.
You got to get down to the coast and get warm down here at some point.
Yeah, you live in Lucca, right?
Yep. Yeah, Lucca, like at the center of all the what was like it's the OG Girona, basically.
Yeah, we talked about this before. We're gonna have to, yeah, we're gonna have to make sure that people get the word out that Lucca is the original Girona, is the
Yeah.
yeah, the OG. Totally. So yeah, I got to get down there and bring my Chinelli down there, and we'll take a ride, and I'll just try and keep up with you. Won't be keeping up with you, but I'll try.
But well, I know where all the pasticceria are, so you go.
Ouch, that hurts.
Yeah. So, but yeah, let's do it for sure.
Okay, man. Well, yeah, let's sign off. And if you want to just hang out for a minute, do you want to, if people want to kind of follow you, you want to give your social handles and your website and all that good stuff so people can know where to find you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm at D Van Orsdel, DVANORSDEL on Instagram.
And your website?
And the website it's actually a coaching website, devo.com.
So you do coaching as well.
Yep, I do coaching. So I've got a bunch of under 23 athletes and American athletes.
Very cool. Well, thank you, David. And like I said, hang around for a second. We'll talk.
Yep. Thanks so much.
Okay.